Donald Trump destroys TV host. His response leaves America in shock. Imagine sitting in front of your screen, watching history unfold in real time. The tension in the studio is thick, almost suffocating, as the cameras roll and the lights shine down on two figures locked in an inevitable clash. On one side, Donald Trump, a man who has built an empire, led a nation, and left a trail of controversy wherever he goes. He sits with his usual confidence, hands resting lightly on the table, his expression unreadable, yet undeniably composed. He has faced the media 1,000 times before, but tonight is different. Tonight, he is not just here to answer questions. He is here to take control of the conversation. Opposite him, Rachel Carter, one of the most relentless journalists in the industry. She adjusts her notes with a precise, almost surgical movement. She is known for her ability to make even the most seasoned politicians sweat. But as she glances up at her guest, she knows this will be no ordinary interview. Because Trump is not like the others. He doesn't play by the rules. He never has. The massive screen behind them flashes the bold title of the show, The Real Story, a reminder that tonight is supposed to be about uncovering the truth. But whose truth will prevail? The studio is eerily silent. The audience sits on the edge of their seats, eyes darting between the two figures in the spotlight. Some are here to see Trump dismantled, exposed. Others are waiting for him to strike back, to prove, once again, why he remains one of the most influential figures in America. Behind the cameras, the show's producer grips his headset tightly, barking last-minute instructions to his crew. The tension is almost unbearable. Then, the countdown begins. 3, 2, 1. The lights intensify. The cameras zoom in, and with a single breath, Rachel Carter leans forward. "Donald Trump," she says, her voice steady but charged with intent. "Let's get right to it." Trump doesn't flinch. He sits back slightly, tilting his head, as if considering the weight of the question, but his expression remains unreadable. The room is completely still, waiting for his response. Rachel Carter, unfazed, keeps her eyes locked on him. She's not here for pleasantries, not here to waste time. She wants a direct answer, and she expects him to be on the defensive. "You've been called a businessman, a leader," she continues, her voice sharp, controlled, but also a disruptor, even a threat to democracy. "Many believe your influence is dangerous." She pauses, letting the words settle in the air, before delivering the final blow. "So let's get straight to it. Do you take responsibility for the division you've caused in this country?" The question lands like a hammer, echoing in the minds of those watching. The audience waits, some expecting Trump to dodge, others anticipating a fiery rebuttal. But he doesn't rush to respond. Instead, he exhales slowly, almost as if amused. Before finally speaking, "Rachel," he says, his voice calm but deliberate. "I have to ask, who exactly is saying that? The American people? Or the media that's been against me from the very beginning?" A murmur ripples through the audience. It's not the answer Carter expected. Instead of defending himself, Trump flips the question back onto her. He isn't just responding. He's challenging the very premise of the debate. Rachel, keeping her composure, leans in. "I mean the millions of Americans who have seen the protests, the headlines, the investigations. The people who once supported you, but now question your leadership," she fires back, her tone unwavering. Trump nods slightly, as if he's been expecting this. The people? Or what they've been told to believe? His words are slow, deliberate. The weight of them settles over the studio, forcing everyone to stop and think. Some in the audience shift uncomfortably. Others nod, intrigued. Trump isn't just pushing back. He's planting a seed of doubt. Rachel doesn't let up. She's prepared for this. "So you're saying that every criticism against you is just media manipulation? That the investigations, the court cases, the opposition, they're all made up?" Her tone sharpens. She knows this is a critical moment. Trump, still calm, shakes his head. "I'm saying that when the same people, the same networks, the same politicians attack you day after day, maybe, just maybe, it's not about the truth. Maybe it's about control." Silence. A few audience members exchange glances. The tension is electric. Rachel quickly scans her notes, searching for her next attack. She expected him to deny, to defend. Instead, he's making this about something bigger than himself. Donald, she says, her voice measured but firm, you claim to be fighting for the people, but many say your words, your actions, have deepened the divide in this country. Do you deny that? Trump leans forward now, his presence commanding. Rachel, let me ask you, was the country united before I came along? His tone is steady, unwavering. Because last I checked, politicians have been dividing this country for decades. The difference is, I didn't pretend it wasn't happening. The audience stirs. Rachel hesitates just for a second, a fraction of a moment, but Trump sees it. He knows he has turned the conversation. This is no longer about him being on trial. It's about who controls the narrative. And now, he's the one holding the mic. Trump leans back, his smirk barely visible, but the confidence in his voice is unmistakable. He knows exactly what he's doing. He isn't here to defend himself. He's here to take control of the conversation. His eyes flicker with amusement as he delivers his counter. Rachel, let me ask you something. Who exactly is saying that? The American people? Or the media that's been against me from day one? His voice is steady, almost casual, but the weight behind his words is undeniable. A murmur ripples through the audience. Rachel Carter keeps her expression neutral, but she knows what just happened. Trump has already turned the tables, and they're barely minutes into the interview. The studio's energy shifts. Some viewers lean in, intrigued by his defiance. Others cross their arms, waiting for Carter to push back. She does. Your critics say your rhetoric fuels division, she starts. But before she can finish, Trump leans forward, cutting her off. His presence, his timing, it's all deliberate. Critics, he repeats, eyebrows raising slightly. Or political opponents. Because last I checked, millions of Americans agree with me. His voice carries a quiet intensity, the kind that makes people listen. A calculated pause follows. It lingers in the air, forcing the audience to sit with the thought. Carter, refusing to lose her footing, quickly presses forward. Donald, we're talking about facts. The protests, the investigations, the legal battles. Are you saying those are all just part of some conspiracy against you? Trump exhales, shaking his head slightly, as if he's disappointed in the question. Rachel, let's be honest here. When I ran for president, they said I couldn't win. When I won, they said I cheated. When I was in office, they tried to impeach me twice. And now, years later, they're still coming after me. If that's not a coordinated effort, I don't know what is. The audience stirs. Even those who disagree with him can't deny the impact of his words. Carter doesn't let the momentum slip. She sharpens her tone. So, you're saying there's no reason for the backlash? That you've done nothing to contribute to the division in this country? Trump leans in slightly, locking eyes with her. Rachel, let me ask you, was this country perfectly united before I came along? He pauses just long enough for the question to sink in. Because I don't remember a time when Republicans and Democrats sat around singing Kumbaya together. The difference is, I didn't pretend everything was fine. I called out the corruption. I called out the lies. And guess what? That made people uncomfortable. Carter narrows her eyes, but Trump doesn't back down. You want to talk about division? Fine. But let's be clear about something. I didn't create the divide. I exposed it. And some people just can't handle that. Silence grips the studio for a brief moment. Carter knows she can't afford to let him control the conversation, so she leans in, delivering her next strike. Donald, you say you exposed the divide, but critics argue that you made it worse. Your words, your tweets, your public statements, they've had real consequences. Do you take responsibility for that? Trump doesn't hesitate. Rachel, people have been angry at politicians for decades. The only difference is, when I spoke, people actually listened. And that scared the establishment. He gestures slightly, as if motioning to an unseen force. They don't want someone like me. Someone who can't be bought, someone who doesn't play by their rules. So what do? They turn every little thing into a scandal, hoping people will forget what's really going on. Carter tightens her grip on her pen, her expression composed but her eyes sharp. Are you saying you're a victim in all of this? Trump lets out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Oh, I'm not a victim. I'm a fighter. And that's exactly why they're so desperate to take me down. The audience reacts. Some nod in agreement. Others shift uncomfortably, unsure of what to make of his words. But one thing is clear. Trump has seized control of the conversation, and Carter is struggling to wrest it back. She steels herself for her next question, knowing she has to hit harder. But deep down, she knows Trump isn't here to be cornered. He's here to make sure that, no matter what happens, he leaves the audience questioning everything they thought they knew. Rachel Carter doesn't waste a second. She leans forward, her eyes locked on Trump, her voice firm and unshaken. You claim to fight for the people, yet you've been accused of undermining democracy. You refuse to accept election results, you challenge the media, and some say you even incite chaos. How do you justify that? The question cuts through the room like a blade. The audience holds its breath, waiting for the response. Some are hoping to see Trump stumble, to see him struggle under the weight of his own words. Others are waiting for him to fire back, to prove once again why his voice carries so much weight in American politics. Trump, however, remains completely unfazed. He doesn't rush. He doesn't fidget. Instead, he lets the moment stretch, watching Carter with the same calm intensity he's displayed throughout the night. Then, with a small shake of his head, he exhales. "Rachel, let's be real," he says, his voice steady but firm. "The only people afraid of what I say are the ones afraid of the truth." He leans back slightly, then raises his hand, gesturing toward the cameras. The media doesn't report. He pauses for just a second, letting the tension build before delivering the final blow. They manipulate. And you know it. A wave of murmurs rolls through the audience. Some nod in agreement, others exchange uneasy glances. Carter's jaw tightens. She knows that if she doesn't take control of this moment, Trump will. She refuses to let that happen. "Donald, this isn't about the media. This is about your actions," she fires back. "You've spread misinformation. You've encouraged distrust in American institutions. Do you not see the danger in that?" Trump scoffs, shaking his head slightly as if he finds the accusation almost amusing. "Rachel, let me ask you, who decides what's misinformation? You? The media? The same people who pushed false stories about me for years." His voice is sharper now, more direct. "Let's talk about trust in institutions. The American people were told there was no corruption in Washington. They were told their voices mattered. And yet, time and time again, they see the same politicians making deals behind closed doors, the same elites getting richer while hardworking Americans struggle. But when I call it out, suddenly I'm the problem." The audience stirs again. Carter's fingers tighten around her pen. She refuses to let Trump dictate the pace of this conversation. "So what's your point?" she challenges. "That you're the only one telling the truth? That everyone else, journalists, politicians, even the justice system, are all lying?" Trump leans in now, his voice dropping just enough to draw everyone in. "I'm saying people should think for themselves," he states. "I'm saying that when someone tells you what you're allowed to believe, that's when you should start asking questions." His eyes flicker with something unreadable, something deeper. Because the truth doesn't fear being questioned. Only lies do. Silence grips the room. Carter knows this is dangerous territory. She has to pivot, fast. "Donald, you say you fight for the people, but let's be clear. Some of the loudest voices against you are the people themselves. The protests, the investigations, the anger. You can't ignore that." Trump doesn't miss a beat. "Rachel, people are angry because they've been lied to," he fires back. "They were promised change, and they got the same old corruption. And when I came in and actually shook things up, the establishment panicked. They needed a villain, and they chose me." He sits back slightly, shaking his head. "Let's not pretend the outrage is organic. The media stirs it up. The politicians fuel it. It's a game, and you know it." Carter exhales sharply. "Donald, you keep blaming the media and the government, but at some point, don't you have to take responsibility for your own words and actions?" Trump leans forward again, his expression unreadable. "Rachel, I take responsibility for one thing. I told the truth when nobody else would." He holds her gaze, unwavering. "And if that makes people uncomfortable, that's not my problem. That's theirs." The room is thick with tension. Carter searches for the next strike. The next question that will put Trump back on the defensive. But deep down, she knows he's not here to defend himself. He's here to make sure, by the end of this conversation, people start questioning everything they thought they knew. Rachel Carter refuses to back down. She knows she's running out of time to land a decisive blow, and this is her moment. Her voice sharpens, her gaze unwavering. Donald, if you claim to fight corruption, how do you explain your own business dealings, lawsuits, and political tactics? How do we know you're not just another power-hungry leader? The words cut through the studio like a blade. The question isn't just for Trump. It's for the audience, for the millions watching at home, for every person who has ever wondered if the man sitting across from her is truly fighting for them or simply for himself. Silence. Trump doesn't rush to answer. He doesn't fidget or react. He simply sits there, letting the weight of the moment settle. The pause is deliberate, powerful. Then, finally, he speaks, calm, measured, but with a presence that commands the room. Because, Rachel, I'm not controlled. I don't answer to special interests. I don't bend to the media. I fight for the people, whether you like it or not. His voice carries through the studio with an authority that is impossible to ignore. The room is dead silent. Even Carter, always composed, seems momentarily caught off guard. She was expecting deflection, anger, maybe even an attack, but not this. She quickly regains her footing, refusing to let the moment slip away. You say you're not controlled, but let's be honest. Your businesses, your influence, your connections, doesn't that make you part of the very system you claim to be fighting against? Trump smirks, shaking his head slightly as if he finds the question almost amusing. Rachel, the difference between me and them is simple. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I built a business, yes. I made deals. I played the game. But when I ran for office, I didn't do it to protect the system. I did it to break it. He leans forward now, his voice steady, unwavering. You see, the real power isn't in business. It's in politics. It's in the people who sit in back rooms making decisions that affect your life without you even realizing it. And those are the people who hate me the most. Carter narrows her eyes. And yet, you've benefited from that same system for decades. Trump shrugs. And then I turned against it. And that's why they'll do anything to stop me. His tone is matter of fact, as if he's explaining something that should be obvious. Rachel, let's not pretend we don't know how this works. Politicians don't go after other politicians unless they're a threat. The lawsuits, the investigations, the media attacks, it's all about one thing: control. And I don't play by their rules. Carter won't let up. She shakes her head, pressing on. So what's your endgame, Donald? If you're not in this for power, then what do you want? Trump doesn't hesitate. I want the American people to wake up. His voice is quieter now, but somehow it feels even heavier. I want them to stop blindly trusting politicians who make promises they never keep. I want them to stop listening to a media that tells them what to think instead of how to think. I want them to take their country back. Another pause. The weight of his words hangs over the room. Carter takes a deep breath. She knows this is her last chance. Donald, let's say you get what you want. Let's say the system is broken down. The establishment is shaken. What then? Who holds you accountable? Trump's expression doesn't change. He looks directly at her, his voice steady. The people. The answer is simple, but the impact is profound. Carter stares at him for a long moment, searching for something, anything, to counter with. But there's nothing left to say. The audience sits frozen, each person processing what they've just heard. The debate isn't over. The conversation isn't finished. But in this moment, one thing is clear. Trump has made his case, and whether people agree with him or not, they can't ignore him. Carter straightens, her expression unreadable. She takes a slow breath before turning to the camera. Donald Trump, whether people love you or hate you, there's no denying one thing. You always leave people with something to think about. Trump smirks, leans back in his chair, and says nothing. He doesn't have to. The message has already been sent. The room was silent, but outside, the world was anything but. Millions of people across the country were watching the press conference live, their eyes glued to their screens as Emma Carter stood face to face with the President of the United States. Social media was in chaos. News outlets scrambled to push out headlines. Some people were in disbelief, others in awe. A simple press conference about policy had turned into a moment no one had seen coming. Trump's words hung in the air, his unexpected response sending shockwaves through the room. Reporters who had spent years covering politics, who had seen every kind of staged moment, sat frozen, unsure if what they had just witnessed was a carefully planned move or something completely unscripted. Camera flashes continued, capturing Emma's face, strong, determined, unshaken. She had not come here for attention. She had not come here looking for sympathy. She had come here demanding change. And now, the most powerful man in the country was listening. Trump straightened his jacket, scanning the sea of journalists before turning his attention back to Emma. His voice was firm, clear. "I'm going to make sure this problem is fixed," he said, and the entire room leaned in. Veterans should not be left behind. If companies won't give them a chance, then we will. He turned slightly toward one of his aides, who stood motionless at the edge of the stage. "Find out if there's an open position at the Department of Veterans Affairs." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few reporters exchanged stunned looks. Others scrambled to write down his words. Emma felt her breath hitch in her throat. She had come here ready to fight, ready to be ignored, ready to be escorted out by security. She had not expected this. Trump looked back at her. "You said you just need a way in," he said. "All right, here's your way in. Work with us. Help fix this from the inside." The moment the words left his mouth, the room exploded. Reporters shot up from their seats, voices clashing as they hurled questions toward the stage. "Is this a real job offer or just a publicity stunt? Mr. President, are you bypassing government hiring procedures? Emma, do you trust that this administration will follow through?" Emma stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden whirlwind of attention, but she did not waver. She met Trump's gaze, searching for any sign that this was just for show. But there was no hesitation in his expression, no carefully rehearsed political smile, just certainty. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "If this is real, if this is an actual opportunity to make a difference, then yes, I accept." The room buzzed with urgency. Headlines flashed across news stations. Breaking: Trump offers veteran government position on the spot. Twitter flooded with reactions. Some praised Emma for standing up, calling her a hero. Others were skeptical, questioning if this was just a moment of political theater. But one thing was undeniable. No one was ignoring her anymore. The moment spread like wildfire. Within hours, Emma Carter's name was everywhere. News anchors dissected the press conference, social media exploded with debates, and millions of Americans watched the clip of her confrontation with the president on repeat. Some called it a groundbreaking moment, a shift in how the country viewed its veterans. Others dismissed it as political theater, another headline that would fade in a few weeks. But for Emma, this wasn't about politics. This was real. Veterans across the country spoke up, sharing their own stories. Some had been out of the military for years, struggling to find stable work despite their experience. Others had given up entirely, forced into jobs far below their qualifications just to survive. "She said what we've been screaming for years," one veteran wrote in a viral post. "Maybe now someone will actually listen." Debates raged across news networks. "Did Trump just change history?" one headline read. Another asked, "Is this the moment veterans finally get the opportunities they deserve?" Political analysts argued over whether Trump's promise would turn into real action, whether Emma's appointment to the Department of Veterans Affairs was a genuine effort to fix the system or just a publicity move. But outside of the media frenzy, something far more important was happening. People were paying attention. For the first time in years, the struggles of veterans weren't being buried beneath other headlines. They were front and center, impossible to ignore. Emma, however, didn't have time to get lost in the noise. 2 days after the press conference, she stood in front of the massive Department of Veterans Affairs building, staring up at the glass doors that would lead her into an entirely new battlefield. The weight of what had happened still hadn't fully settled in. She had spent months feeling like no one saw her, like she was just another name lost in a system that didn't care. Now, she was stepping into the very heart of that system, not as an outsider, but as someone with the power to change it. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby was busy, filled with government employees, veterans waiting for appointments, and officials moving from one meeting to the next. As she walked past the front desk, She could feel the stares. Some people recognized her from the news. Some whispered as she passed. She wasn't sure if they saw her as a hero or just another problem walking through the door. She didn't care. She wasn't here to be liked. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to fight for those who had been left behind, just like she had been. Her first day had barely begun, but she already knew one thing. This was just the start. Emma walked through the halls of the Department of Veterans Affairs, her footsteps steady, her purpose clear. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her, but she welcomed it. She had spent months searching for a way forward, and now, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every veteran who had ever been ignored, for every soldier who had come home only to feel abandoned by the very country they had sworn to protect. Across the nation, people were still talking about her confrontation with the president. Some believed it was the start of real change, a turning point for veterans who had been overlooked for far too long. Others were skeptical, waiting to see if this was just another empty promise that would fade from the headlines. Emma didn't have the luxury of waiting. Change didn't come from headlines. It came from action. As she sat at her desk for the first time, she pulled out a worn piece of paper from her bag. It was a list she had made months ago, a list of veterans she had met who were still searching for work, still struggling, still fighting to be seen. She ran her fingers over the names, each one a reminder of why she was here. She wasn't going to let them down, because this wasn't just her fight. This was a fight for every veteran who had ever been forgotten. Would this moment bring real change? Only time would tell. But Emma Carter wasn't waiting for time to decide. She was here. She was ready. And she was just getting started.